Fresh haircut and a fresh glow up on my rig. Welcome back to the Manic Geek, everyone. I hope you're all doing well out there. So, as you can probably spot right here, at least for those of you that have been following along, my personal rig has gotten a bit of a visual and a slight performance upgrade in recent history with the addition of a Fractal Design Celsius Plus S24 Dynamic with my own Prisma fans. More on that heatsink in a future content piece. A 1TB Team Group T4 solid state drive for specifically my game storage. And I went ahead and added a cable extension kit to this build. Now for someone like me that's done a lot of builds in the past, not necessarily on the channel, but in general, I've handled cable extension kits before. I know how to address the cable management for them. I know how to get them running and looking clean. But a first-time system builder that's just now getting into a visual modification like this might be a little daunted by the fact that you're effectively doubling, or in some cases more, the length of the cables for your power supply, and that can create something of a cable management nightmare. So the goal of today's video is to take a quick look at the cable extension kit I specifically got, and then discuss how you can make your cable management be that place where form meets function so that everything's clean and tidy but easy to get to in your build in the event you need to run maintenance on your computer. Now, a couple of things to address before getting into the meat and potatoes of this video, because I suspect it's going to be something of a long one. First of all, thank you so much to everyone who has been watching my content over the course of the past year or so. We finally cracked 1,300 subscribers, and honestly, even just a year ago, I didn't think I'd be hitting that number. So thank you to everyone for watching my content. I hope you continue to enjoy it. But I've also noticed this weird trend where most of the people watching my videos aren't necessarily subscribed to the channel. So if you want to make sure you can help the channel in a free, easy way, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon next to it so you're notified every time my content goes up fresh for you. It should be coming out every Monday moving forward. Now, of course, due to the length of this video, there will be timestamps down in the video's description, as well as Amazon or Newegg links to any of the parts discussed here today. So firstly, let's quickly touch on this kit from Aquiein. At least that's the nearest I can figure on how this is pronounced. This particular cable kit came at around $38 from Newegg, and I will have the Newegg and Amazon links down in the video's description because the colorways are a little bit different per site. Unfortunately, there aren't very many of them, but this sort of carbon gray kit that I got looks fantastic, especially when you've got light playing off of the PET style sleeving that it uses here. You get all kinds of subtle hues of gray going on in there. It's really eye-catching. Now, as far as what this kit includes, you get basically everything you would need for a single GPU configuration with one 24-pin cable, two EPS 12-volt cables, with one of them being 4+4 and one of them being 8-pin, as well as two 6+2-pin PCI-E cables. They also give you a lot of cable combs to go with the cables. They're all pretty standard clear acrylic combs, but they feel really durable. They also give you these round ones to use for your PCIe cables in case you want to give them a fuller look than what a configuration like mine does, which is a bit more standard. Now, as a result of all the combs that came with this kit, I was able to get these runs looking extremely clean. Like, I don't think I've ever had a build looking quite this good before. And while these extensions are a little bit on the stiff side, they're still relatively easy to work with. Now, the main issue with this and basically any other cable extension kit out there is going to be the fact that these are not short. These are about 35 centimeters long per extension. And as I mentioned earlier, that's going to effectively double the length of your power supply cables in most instances. And unless you've got a larger case, or even if you do have a larger case like this Fractal Design Meshify S2 here, you may still be hard pressed to get the cables clean and tidy behind the motherboard tray, because remember, while it doesn't necessarily matter how museum quality or art-like your cable management looks behind the tray, it still needs to be functional and allow you to reach all of your components in the event you need to upgrade or service any of them. So we're going to bring it in close, and I'm going to demo for you on the power supply that I have out front here how you can go about addressing the cable extension bit of cable management in your build. All right, so we brought it up close here so we can take a look at how to manage this wild and untamed length of cables that typically are associated with a power supply. Now, just to quickly touch on the power supply in use today, this is a Thermaltake Smart BX1 750 watt. Now this is the power supply that I'm currently using for my testbed system. More on that potentially in a future content piece. This is a non-modular power supply we're working with. The first thing you're going to consider when managing your cables for something like extensions is the fact that modular power supplies have connectors running typically all along the front face of the power supply here. So the fact that they exit the power supply at different parts physically means there's going to need to be that much more length you need for the power supply cable to reach the cable extension. So you want to keep those lengths in mind when you're working with extensions. Now in this case, because we are dealing with a non-modular power supply, everything is exiting from the same point in the PSU chassis, so we have to worry about that a lot less here. Now the first thing that I would always recommend, get any cables out of the way that you're not going to be using for your build, or likely ever. If you're using a modular power supply, that part's easy, just don't include that cable. If you have a non-modular power supply like this one, what I've gone ahead and done with this is just bundle it together with a twist tie and left enough length in the cable coming off of the power supply that I can easily just tuck it towards the face of the power supply here and not really have to worry about it again once it gets back into the system. Now, once you've gotten all your unused cables out of the way, the next thing you're going to want to consider is actually your extensions. So what I would do at this point is leave your power supply cables alone, then come over to your build and start running the extensions to where you would want them to run, or need them to run, I guess. Let me get this adjusted. On your computer. So you can see we've got our EPS 12 volt cables here, we've got our 24 pin here, and because of how I'm running my PCIe cables, I'm not actually running them behind the motherboard tray at all. The bulk of the cables just rests down in the basement down here. But as you can see, once I got all of these run, the 24 pin stops near the bottom of the motherboard tray, but not quite at the bottom. Well, the EPS 12 volt cables run about midway, almost parallel with the CPU socket itself. So those are the lengths that I'm going to need to work with to manage for the power supply. So first things first, the ATX 24 pin cable. Now, normally I don't advocate for the use of zip ties on system builds. I think it's kind of a waste of plastic. It's basically a one use and done kind of thing. What I usually recommend is Velcro ties like these, and you can get them in pretty sizable rolls. I've got them in black and in gray, just depending on the where the tie is going and whether or not I'm going to be seeing it from the other side of the motherboard tray. But you can get these for a couple of bucks at like Walmart or something like that. Maybe not now because of everything that's going on, but if I can, I should have some links to these in the video's description. Now in this case, a zip tie actually works well because it gives a tight, hard cutoff point for the length of cable that I need for the ATX 24 pin. In this case, I've got about 4 to 5 inches or so of cable measured from the base, from the exit of the power supply face to this point of the cable. Basically, all I do then is take end of the 24 pin right here. I match it up with that zip tie right there, and then just sort of bundle the cables onto each other. And then you take one of the Velcro straps and you just sort of tie it around the cables right here. Now you could admittedly probably get this a little bit neater if you spent just a little bit more time with it, but this is just for demo purposes to illustrate the concept in practice. But functionally what we've done here is shorten the length of these cables to the point that if we were to put that power supply into this case over here, that cable would meet up more or less with where our ATX 24-pin extension is running down from the motherboard behind the motherboard tray here. So, getting back down to the cables, let's work on the rest of them. Now, as far as the rest of your cables go, stuff like your EPS 12 volt or your PCIe cables are all going to be managed a little bit differently depending on the size of your case, where the cable cutouts are for these cables to run through, and even stuff like the length of your GPU can all influence how these cables are then going to be managed. But take for instance this PCIe cable that I have for the 6-pin header on my RTX 2070. Because this is a dual 6+2-pin connector, there's a lot of this that just wasn't going to be used for my purposes. So what I did was tie back one of the 6+2-pin connectors entirely back onto the cable, and then fold back the 2-pin part of the other 6+2-pin connector, so that all I have is the one 6-pin connector that's running out to the graphics card. And honestly, even if you were to just have it set up like this on the inside of your case, that would look relatively clean. Yes, you would have all of these unused cables that were exposed, but honestly, this is about as clean as you could hope to get. And then if you're using cable extensions on top of that, having the cables neatly ordered like this makes it really easy to fold them back onto themselves, much like we did with the ATX 24-pin cable here, and get things super tidy. But there's a couple of ways that you can approach cable management for something like SATA cables. You can start at either the very first connector on the cable, or you can start at the very last one. Again, this is all going to depend on where components are located in your specific build as to whether or not this is going to make any sense to you either way. For example, for my build up here, there we go, I actually had to use a SATA cable extender kit that came with the Meshify S2 here, because while I was using one SATA cable directly off of my power supply to power my hard drive and my little Antec fan controller here, I was not able to get the single cable also powering the power supply shroud mounted solid state drive. Thankfully, this case came with a SATA extension cable that plugged into one of the headers on my existing cable and provided additional SATA connections that were spaced a little bit further apart, so that I was able to just use one of the last connectors on this SATA power cable right here, run power over to that solid state drive, and just tuck the rest out of the way, but still keeping everything clean and tidy back here. And the same strategies as before are of course going to apply to your EPS 12 volt cable. But again, it's all going to depend on your unique case environment, where your cables are running, and how long your cable extensions are. The ones I used today were 35 millimeters. Some might be a little bit shorter, some might even be a little bit longer, as crazy as that sounds. So keep all of these in mind as sort of a guideline rather than a rule to help you take your cables from this to something more like this. Okay, so now that you've seen some examples of some things you can do with your power supply cables to address the added length of extensions, here's what some of that looks like in practice in my personal build. Now again, this is a Fractal Design Meshify S2. It is an ATX mid-tower, but it's got a fair amount of depth behind the motherboard tray, and it's got a fair bit of length to the case as well. So bear in mind, some of these tips may not necessarily apply to your specific case environment. Some cases have more cable management space, some have less. Some are taller, shorter, you get the idea. But outside of the cable extensions, one of the biggest tips that I could provide is follow the cable tie points. Cases have cable tie points where they do, by and large, for a reason. Especially in something like the Meshify S2 here, where you've got all kinds of cable tie points running all the way down this front and bottom edge of the case right here. This basically gets all of my front I/O cables completely out of the way of anything else in the system. So all I have to worry about in the main opening back here is any of the other cables that are going to stuff like my motherboard and my graphics card. And in some instances, following the cable tie points can show you basically exactly how your cables should run in the case that you're working with. Bear in mind though, that's not always going to be the case, so it's a sort of general rule. All of these have little asterisks next to them, and again, they will all be influenced by the specific case environment you're working with. Now, if following the cable tie points isn't really being a super big help to you at first, run the cables just directly to the component that you're trying to plug into first. Then see where the cable is running along the back of your motherboard tray area and figure out where the best point is to anchor that cable. Remember, we just need to have it functional back here and allow your side panel to close effectively and allow you to easily service or replace components. It doesn't need to be a phenomenal work of art back here. It just needs to work and be sort of clean. So to that end, if you notice that when you're draping a cable along, it's running along another cable that already has an anchor point, maybe consider just tying the one cable to the other. I've actually done that in a couple of instances up here with SATA data cables and the like, and while it, again, doesn't look the cleanest, functionally, it works really well. Another tip that I like to give to people, don't use zip ties, or tweezers as some people like to call them. I would always recommend using the Velcro straps that we talked about during the PSU portion of this video. Or even then, if you don't have Velcro straps, use little twist ties, like the stuff that you get on loaves of bread at the supermarket. You can even get little packs of these for even cheaper than what you would pay for the Velcro straps, and these will work just as well for you. The other nice thing about these is that they're not permanently fixed in place like zip ties can be, unless you've got like a really tiny flat head to move the teeth out of the way and loosen it up. All you have to do is untwist these and you get another go at your cable management. Plus, you can easily move them from build to build until they just physically don't hold up anymore. It's a lot less wasteful a practice. Don't be afraid to use the case accessories that you are provided with. When I talk about accessories in this case, I'm also referencing the different features of a case. Take, for example, this Meshify S2 here. We have these side-mounted hard drive caddies up here, and as I alluded to earlier, I'm hiding a fan speed controller inside of this one. In the bottom one, I'm also hiding some of the cables that were just in weird enough spots that there really wasn't a clean or comfortable way for me to anchor them to anything, so I can at least get them out of the way, and if I need to use them in the future, they're still easily accessible. Same thing goes with the way I routed the PCI-E power cables for my GPU in this build. It's actually very similar to the way Jay ran Fractal Josh's cables for his build a little bit back on his channel, and it actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because if your cable grommets on the top of the power supply shroud or on the back of or on the side of the motherboard tray are getting a little crowded, either with things in the way or a bunch of cables coming out of them, having this extra opening in the power supply shroud makes it really easy and simple to route your cables. Plus, you get a really unique look for your build in the process. Another big thing with cable management is considering the components that you're using for your build. Again, I'm using a Meshify S2, so it's a physically larger case. I've got more room to work with for my cables. I'm also using a Fractal Design Celsius Plus heatsink in here. Now, while I will be discussing the performance of this heatsink and some of the interesting quirks that I've discovered with it in a future content piece, this does bring some really unique quality of life cable management features to the table, namely of which being the cable distribution hub that's on the radiator for plugging in the pump, the fans, and your ARGB cables if you have Prisma fans, as well as some 3M backed cable clips that they give you for managing your cables along the side of the radiator. Now, while the cable distribution hub is something that's very specific to this particular all-in-one, those little 3M clips are an idea that would translate really well basically to any all-in-one out there, or any system build for that matter, where you can utilize them. In the event that following the cable tie points fails and running cables directly to a component doesn't help you out, getting little 3M backed clips like that to set behind the motherboard tray, again, provided you have the room, or on the side of a radiator can make really quick and easy work of cable management and still leave everything set up in such a way that you can easily swap in and out components if you need to. Now, the other nice thing about using the Celsius Plus units is that when you have everything plugged into the hub that's on the radiator, you've only got 2 cables to plug into your motherboard and then manage. You've got the 4-pin PWM cable that comes off of the pump, and then you've got this little addressable RGB cable, assuming you're using your lighting sync. I'm just using white lighting in my build for right now, so I get to omit this cable entirely. One less thing to need to worry about managing and making look clean, right? And probably the last best tip that I can offer anyone with regard to cable management: try again. If you've hit this point with your system building adventure, you clearly care about that intersection of form and function. And sometimes it can be a little frustrating getting the cabling to do exactly what you want it to do and run exactly the way you want it to run. Maybe you're just in a place right then and there where you can't really clearly envision how you want the cables to run or where they can potentially run in your build. That's okay. Just get it to a point that it's good enough at that point, slap your side panel back on, and just enjoy the build, and then come back to it again the next time you run maintenance on your system. And each time you'll get the cables a little bit cleaner, a little bit cleaner, a little bit cleaner, until eventually you arrive at a finished product that you can be proud of. And as a lot of us are probably figuring out now that we're largely working from home, if we're working at all right now, having a visually appealing and cleanly laid out desk setup can mean all the difference between productivity and maintaining a positive state of mind throughout all of this. Anyway, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. I hope you found this useful. If you did, or you know someone else who could utilize these tips to beautify their build, make sure you share it with them. Make sure you hit the thumbs up button if you liked what you saw. And again, hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you're notified every time I upload fresh content for you. And I'll catch you all next time. So take it easy.